All right. Hopefully everyone is logged in, and I'd like to welcome you to the fourth day of our Viticulture virtual field days. My name is Jackie Perkins. I am a research technician with Rufus Isaacs, and I'll be the host for today. So yeah, thanks for joining us virtually. Got a few housekeeping items to go through as we get started. First, I'd like to highlight the fact that MSU is an affirmative action equal opportunity employer, which means that our programs and materials are open to all without regard to race, color, national origin, sex, gender identity, religion, age, height, weight, disability, political belief, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, or veteran status. So as people join, obviously everything's gone virtual these days. So some people might be new to participating in webinars. So here's just some technical troubleshooting for you if you're having any issues. If you can't hear, go to the audio settings. Obviously you can't hear me say this if you're having audio problems, but there's some examples on the bottom of the screen for adjusting your audio settings. I also want to let you know that the chat is disabled. So if you have questions during the presentation or at the end, you can use the Q&A button to ask questions. And if you're having technical difficulties beyond what this slide covers, there is the help desk that you can contact for technical support. So as I said, this is the fourth day. So hopefully some of you have been able to join for the previous field days that we had the last few days. Today we're talking about insects, and Rufus Isaacs will be the presenter. And then there is one more day of this event tomorrow with Catherine East talking about grape rootstocks. So that'll be interesting as well. So please join us if you can. These sessions have been and will be recorded, and you can request those recordings if you're interested. And then later on, the recordings and the videos from the field day will be posted online for you to refer back to as well. There's a survey after the session, which you can fill out. It will be anonymous. So please participate in that if you have time. There aren't any RUP credits for this event. And this is just a reminder that the small fruits and hops survey is ongoing. So if you haven't participated in that yet, please do. That's very helpful for understanding research needs and helping to secure funding, make decisions, and develop new marketing programs. So please participate if you have not already. And I just wanted to also introduce myself to those who don't know me. My name is Jackie Perkins. As I said, I'm a research technician and lab manager with Rufus Isaacs. So I help with a lot of the research projects and coordinating that with him. So if you might see me around at vineyards or other events, please say hi if we haven't gotten a chance to meet when we're able to be in person again one day. With that, I will take us to the in the field video. So like I said, everything's gone virtual. So Rufus and I did some video presentations of our work in the field, and Renee is going to share that with you.
Hi, I'm Rufus Isaacs from the Department of Entomology at Michigan State University, and we're here in our research vineyard on the campus to talk about some of the work we're doing at the moment on invasive insect species. So grapes are a valuable crop in our state, and we're trying to protect them from insects that might be coming in to the state and some that we already know are here. And so I want to start with the one that we know is here, which is spotted-winged Drosophila. This is an insect that has been in Michigan for about 10 years. And we use these monitoring traps to check every week how the population is developing. And although grapes are not a highly susceptible crop, we have seen in recent years that, especially near to harvest, the insect, this spotted-winged Drosophila, can cut its way into the grapes, can help move around some of the pathogens that can affect grape quality at harvest time, and can help reduce the quality of those grapes. So by monitoring the pest early, we get to see how the population is developing, and then we can give recommendations to the growers on how to manage that. So this insect is part of our research this summer, and most of the action will happen later as we get closer to September. The other project related to invasive insect pests is shown with this trap here. So this is a monitoring trap that we were provided by the USDA, and they have a program for monitoring these invasive pests across the country. And in Michigan, we're partnering with the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development here with a project that's been going on for a number of years, where we've been putting traps. This one's for the light brown apple moth. Been putting traps out around the state in lots of vineyards and trapping every week to see whether or not we have this invasive pest. Because if these get into Michigan, we definitely want to know that early and develop an appropriate response. So far, over the last 5 years of this project, we haven't found any of these invasive moth pests that we're monitoring for, so that's good news. Pages full of zeros look really good in that project when we look at the numbers at the end of the season. And then the last invasive pest I wanted to talk about is one that we don't yet have here in Michigan, and this is the spotted lanternfly. It's in Pennsylvania and is slowly moving out into surrounding states. So we're watching carefully for it. The Department of Natural Resources are looking, and also members of some of the federal government agencies. And so we're really hoping to detect that early if it does get into Michigan, because grapes are particularly susceptible to it, and the damage it does could really hurt our industry. So we're looking for spotted lanternfly as well as these other invasive pests that I just talked about.
Hi, my name's Jackie Perkins. I'm an entomologist at Michigan State University, and today I'm going to tell you about some of the scouting programs that we're working on this summer. So me and a crew of other people at MSU are working to scout vineyards throughout the state in all of the main grape growing regions, and we do this scouting weekly so that we can contribute to up-to-date, accurate, on-time reports of what's happening in vineyards during the season. So that allows us to give real-time updates of what diseases and insects are most important right now. I focus on the insect side of things. So most of the scouting that I do is focusing on insects that are economic pests for grapes, and the main pest is grape berry moth. So that's the pest that I'm sure everyone's familiar with, struggle with it on grape clusters. And so a lot of the scouting that we do for that involves first trapping for adults. So we use these orange delta traps, and we put these at the vineyards that we scout, and we use that to monitor for adults and their activity throughout the season. As the grape clusters develop, then we start to see eggs and damage forming, and this pest is particularly tricky to manage for because there's multiple generations in a season. So we have to watch for the size of the larva and when they're laying eggs. We also help growers keep track of the models that we use on EnviroWeather to predict when egg laying will start. So a lot of the scouting that we do informs those extension articles and reports that help growers keep track of when GBM management needs to occur. So I do have a cluster here that has GBM damage on it. Mostly what you look for is webbing and discoloration of the fruit. You can see eggs sometimes on the top, and then we peel that apart, look at the age of the larva, and that sort of thing. We also look for other insects like phylloxera, which is this pest here that will cause galls to form on the underside of the leaves, Japanese beetle, rose chafer, things that might feed on the shoots and cause damage that way. So we keep growers informed about all sorts of insects that are occurring throughout the season and give those timely updates. We are also working on comparing different programs of berry moth control. So we work with the growers that we scout at their farms to try different management programs in different areas of their farm for grape berry moth, in hopes of helping to figure out which programs work the best under different circumstances and continue to provide information to growers that's useful in helping with that management.
All right, Rufus, I think we're going to move into your presentation now.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. It's great to have you here for
lunch to talk about insects in grapes. Usually we're doing this out in the field at our research station, and I'm sorry we can't do that this year. Would have been great to meet people, and by now we should have been eating lunch together. But hopefully you can still enjoy a glass of Michigan wine this evening and imagine that we're all together at the research station. Hopefully we'll be back there next year. So I am going to cover a little bit to add on to what you just saw in the videos, and hopefully we'll have time for questions then at the end. Yeah, I want to acknowledge that Jackie, who you just heard from, was part of this, and then we're also collaborating with Mike Renke down in Southwest Michigan, and so some of his information is in here too. In fact, I think this is his photograph, so some marquette that are starting to ripen up already. So we're starting to get into this veraison period, and this period between now and harvest is really critical for making sure that we have good quality grapes to harvest. So that's where the focus is today in the talk. So this is a quick list of what I'm going to go through, and hopefully we'll get that done with some time for questions at the end. So this happened earlier this spring. We actually released this in February, but I just wanted to let people know, since we're talking about scouting vineyards and identifying pests, that MSU's Pocket Scouting Guide, which has been quite popular with growers, is available for download for free. It's a PDF file, and it's been formatted to help with navigation, but it can go onto your phone, or if you have a tablet, it could go onto your tablet. And you're certainly welcome to still buy the printed pocket guide, but we do have this electronic version available. And I'm not sure if everybody realized that, and then we weren't together to talk about it at other extension meetings. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And if you just search for Pocket Scouting Guide MSU, you should be able to find this link and download it. Scouting is really important. I always emphasize this. And so here at MSU, we have a program where we do this each week through the summer this year. And we've been able to keep that going through the pandemic with a team effort with Jackie and Mike scouting vineyards in Southwest Michigan. And then we had Megan Trammell, who was scouting, and now Ismail, who's the new extension educator for grapes in Northwest Michigan, who's pictured here. He and I were together last week up in Traverse City at this beautiful vineyard, and he's contributing to the team now to put those scouting reports together, and we put those out on Wednesdays. We do the pest-focused information, and then Ismail and Catherine have more of a viticulture focus, so it's a real team effort there. So if you are not getting those reports and you'd like to, maybe in the chat or the question session at the end, we could give you links to get hold of that. So during this period, we're looking to find out what pests are present, and also this helps us make better management decisions rather than just treating a vineyard because it's a calendar date. We can adapt things to what's present, and if pests aren't present, then maybe we don't need to spend the money on a pesticide application and can reduce those inputs. Key times for berry moth, which I'm going to focus on, that Jackie introduced already, are in mid-August and September to scout. And there's other insects that can cause some issues. This time of the year, we start to sometimes see leafhoppers and Japanese beetles. As we get closer to harvest and the fruit ripen, wasps and ants and some other things can get in there, vinegar flies, that can spoil the grapes. So it's definitely a period to keep an eye on the clusters and be ready for whatever shows up. If you're spraying this time of the year, it is really important, especially for berry moth, to get excellent coverage of the clusters, not to stretch intervals too long. Expecting some pesticides to last for weeks and weeks is not realistic. So understand how long they last. And then keep in mind that rainfall, some of these big showers that we're getting this time of the year, can wash off residues. And if we get up into the 80s, 90s, some products really break down quite quickly under those conditions. So those kinds of thoughts can help you maybe get the right product applied if you're treating for insect control and making sure that it will do the job. And in particular for this key pest, great berry moth, if it's this time of the year, we've definitely seen that insect has a long period of activity, and so treatments that
will be able to provide a long period of protection are really important. There are a number of insecticides registered for use in vineyards, and I don't have time to really spend any detailed time on any of these, but just be aware that there's a wide range. And so what we try to do to help people think this through is update our Michigan Fruit Management Guide every year. This is available from the bulletin office at MSU, the bookstore. And you can see the format has the list of what's registered, and then we give efficacy ratings for those at different times of the season. So if you haven't seen this book, it's a really valuable resource and can help guide your decisions. One thing we've done is think about what kind of programs for insect control might work for some of the high grape berry moth pressure vineyards that we experienced last year, and we're working with some farmers this year to implement this program or some adaptations of it and get a better handle on what works well for berry moth and other insects through this period of the season. So we'll be able to report that next winter, but just know that that's still going on this year. We were able to get permission to go out, and as long as we're not meeting with people, we can still get this done. So the focus is on this berry moth. You can see here why it's such an issue. You really don't want to have your grapes infested by the insect or the pathogens that can come with it. And so Jackie and her crew have been visiting vineyards every week through the spring and summer. So far, I'm going to show data from a few vineyards that we're working in. The blue is the total number of moths from actually 2 traps in each vineyard. So you can divide that in half. And you can see that we've got some very high pressure. So these sites are places where berry moth was a significant issue last year. And so you can see hundreds of moths in the spring in the first flight. And then as we got into late June, we started to see the infestation picking up. Growers have been applying insecticides timed with our degree day model. And although it's not down to 0, the trend is decreasing in terms of the larvae in the clusters, or the infestation in the clusters, as we go into July. And we're keeping close eye on this using that program that I just showed. And we hope we'll be able to get much cleaner fruit in September. We also have sites with even greater pressure. So this is a super high pressure site where late June again, infestation picked up very quickly. And at least, again, the trend is in the right direction. And we'll continue monitoring this. And now we're preparing for treatment to protect against the 3rd generation. So I'll talk a little bit more about the timing for that in a minute. This is another vineyard, Chancellor this time. Infestation started a little bit earlier, or maybe it was more apparent a week or 2 earlier, because this is a cultivar where you can see the webbed berries a little bit more clearly. So the 1st generation picked up, and then application to protect against the 2nd generation happened around early July, and we're continuing to monitor this. So this kind of weekly scouting information goes into our scouting report, helps the individual farmer to learn what's happening. But you can see here some of the benefit of a regular check to just get a sense of what's happening and to be able to react. So we're just about to get into August, and that's typically the timing of the start of the 3rd generation of egg laying of grape berry moth. And our model that is up on the EnviroWeather site can help make these decisions. And it's based on when we saw wild grape blooming. It says wild grape in that column, but it's really wild grape blooming. And that was from June the 2nd to June the 12th, depending on where you were in Western Michigan. And so we count degree days from that point of bloom through until 16-20 degree days is when we predict the start of generation 3 egg laying. So with this insect, it's not a very defined start. It is basically starting to pick up, and then we'll continue through August, but it's good not to be late. So this model helps growers really target when, if they're targeting eggs, when they should start protecting the clusters. So far we only see For the very furthest southwest site, we only see one area. That's there in Berrien County, where August the 3rd is predicted, with the weather that we see for the next week, is predicted to be the start. For Van Buren County and the others, it's after August the 5th. And right now, if you look on the weather station site, the predictions don't go beyond August the 5th. So I expect the 6th, 7th, 8th, depending on where you are, will be timing for that protection to start. If you're aiming with products that would be more active on the eggs, then you'd want to go for that timing. We also have a number of broad spectrum insecticides, and those would want to be applied a little bit later. So that 17-20 growing degree days allows time for the eggs to develop. And for those timings, we're probably looking at maybe the second week of August instead. I also just want to mention, as the text at the bottom shows, that one application at this timing won't get you to harvest. And so I just want to highlight keeping an eye on how your protection is working in the hotspots and whether or not you need to go in maybe a couple of weeks later with another application to protect those fruit. Last year, we got a significant late season flight of grape berry moth and some damage from that. So I'm highlighting especially to Michigan growers, that we watch out for a 4th generation. We're currently at about a 14-hour day length, so somewhere in the middle of this graph. And that shows that only if eggs are laid today from berry moth, only about half of them will go into this diapause phase, where they would just stop at the pupa and then not emerge again for the 4th generation. But that means half of them will do that. And so that egg is getting its signal from the day length right now. And 50% of those eggs, or maybe 40% of them next week, will be likely to try it again and get another generation. It's a signal that they've got a long enough season and it's warm enough. So we'll keep an eye on that. But with that crystal ball right now in early August, it would suggest that we're going to get some further pressure as we get towards harvest in 2020. Okay, so last thing on grape berry moth is that we have been trying to improve our detection of this moth later in the season. This degree day model is helpful, but part of the reason we developed it is because the traps were not giving us very good information. In July and August, we'd get very low catches of moths, and we couldn't really time when the insect was active. So a former student, Keith Mason, in my lab, did some studies with lower doses of the pheromone, and he had some success with that. So that was a small scale study. This is now going into the field this year with trials that Jackie's running. And so far, just from a couple of weeks, we found that we can get much higher catches than our standard using less pheromone. So it's a longer discussion about why that might be, but anyway, it's encouraging that we're able to perhaps have a better handle on what's happening later in the season with these new lures. So we'll continue that and hopefully can use that next year in our IPM program. So the last thing I want to switch to is to talking about sour rots. As we get towards harvest, especially in some of the wine grapes, we get this combination of yeasts and acetic acids, and then the insects are moving those around. A number of different insects can do this, but the vinegar flies are particularly attracted to that acetic acid. And there's been some really great work coming out of Cornell and their collaborators recently looking at these connections, and they talk about it as a four-way interaction. So you need the grapes, you need the yeast, you need the acetic acid, and you need the insects. So as an entomologist, we're focusing on the insect part, but I am collaborating with Tim Miles, who you might have heard from earlier this week. And as we get into harvest season, he and I will be working on this together. We've done a little bit already to prepare, and our samples from some previous seasons, we found that although we have a number of native Drosophila species that were already here, spotted winged Drosophila, this newer pest, is getting into these clusters. And when we rear the larvae into adults to find out what species they were, about a third of the vinegar flies coming out are from that new species. So that might be changing how this disease complex acts later in the summer. Some experiments we ran at our Fenville station, we compared the amount of sour rot on some clusters. I don't remember the cultivar here, but it was a susceptible cultivar. And we sealed some clusters with bags, left them open to whatever insects were around. And then some we put in this spotted winged Drosophila, and then also the stink bug, the brown marmorated stink bug. And you can see we at least maybe more than doubled the level of infection when that spotted winged Drosophila was in there. So it is capable of moving these pathogens around, and because it can cut into fruit and break them down, we think this is part of the story of what's going on with sour rot in some of our vineyards. Thinking ahead to if that became an issue in the later part of the season as you approach harvest, there are a number of registered insecticides with short pre-harvest intervals that could be used if you get into a situation like that. Depending on the cultivar, depending on the season, this may not be needed, but from our efficacy trials here using some different registered options, these are the levels of infestation by vinegar flies that we found in the little sampling cups that we use when we tested this a couple of years ago. The other thing related to sour rots is that we may be able to sanitize the clusters using some of these different products that are listed. This trial was done in blueberries, so it's not really completely relevant to grapes, but the idea here is that we can sort of clean out the clusters and reduce the microbes and maybe reduce sour rot development. So we tested those 4, and again, this is blueberries, not grapes. But by protecting from the disease development or by controlling the insects with the entrust, we were able to reduce sour rot. Sorry, the spotted winged Drosophila in the fruit. So that's encouraging that there may be other ways that aren't the broad spectrum insecticides that could help reduce the vinegar flies and the diseases they're transmitting. Last thing, I said it was the last thing before, but this really is the last thing. Not so much of a late season pest, but I wanted to alert growers that if you're seeing something strange in your vineyard that looks like this, it is this grape erinium mite. This is a mite that actually starts feeding early in the season as the leaves are just starting to develop. And then they trick the leaf into making these patches on the underside. This is not a pathogen, it's actually a very high density of leaf hairs that the mite makes the leaves do. And then the mites live inside there completely protected from predators, but also maybe protected from treatments. So this year we've run a trial with help from the folks in the northwestern part of Michigan. So this is a vineyard on Old Mission Peninsula that we were spraying way back in the spring. And there's just 4 different miticides that are being compared there. I can't give you any results yet because we're evaluating this in mid-August, but we hope to be able to share that information during the winter. So to end, I just want to say thank you to everyone for being able to do this work and continuing the work through the pandemic. It's been a whole different experience trying to run research trials under the restrictions that we have, and we need those restrictions, but it's been great that people have still been able to get some of these things done. Thanks to the members of the grape team that we're collaborating with and the grower collaborators out across Michigan. And then these partners, some have provided support verbally, some have provided letters for grant proposals, and then these different organizations have helped fund us so that we could do this and bring this information to you. virtually this year. So with that, I'll stop talking, and hopefully we can spend a little time in a discussion phase. Thanks.
All right, Rufus, you already have a question. This one says, every year I have to deal with many yellow jackets and bull-faced hornets at harvest. What do you recommend as a strategy for dealing with this pest?
Yeah, so we have done a little work on trying to reduce the level of yellow jackets and hornets. Last couple of years, not 2020, but the years before, we used some traps that were baited with apple cider vinegar. Just apple cider. And there's other baits that you can use. And we put those on the outside of the vineyards, kind of in a ring, like between where the woods are and where the vineyards are. And we got some reduction in the level of wasp damage on the inside. These were all netted vineyards, so it was hard to get in and measure. And we weren't there with the picking crew, so we didn't really get to measure whether the pickers had fewer issues. But we did catch a very large number of wasps and see some reduction from that strategy. So that's the non-chemical approach that some people are interested in. There are some treatments that can also help reduce these insects, but of course you're at harvest time, so that's an issue both for workers and something that the winery might not want with sprays close to harvest time either. So it's a tricky one. They do seem to be very cyclical, and there are years where the yellow jackets are much worse than others. We've also tried, but it didn't work very well, the idea of putting a bait early in the season that the queen wasps might go to, and then like prevent the colony from developing. I don't think we had the right baits for that project, so it didn't work out too well. The work that I know about that's going on that's really good in this area is actually out of the lab of Christelle Guedeau in Wisconsin. And she's in the Department of Entomology there and came to our Great Lakes Expo and gave a talk last year about it and the results that they're getting in Wisconsin vineyards. So I don't have the information with me right here today, but if someone's interested, maybe we could circulate the information we got from her through the email after the presentation.
Thanks, Rufus. All right, another question. What's your recommendation for Japanese beetles? Are the traps better or worse than doing nothing?
The traps will catch a lot of Japanese beetles, and I think that makes people feel good, but they're not very good at catching all the beetles, and all you need is a few to get onto the leaves of the vines and start feeding, and that just attracts many more. And so I definitely do not advise putting Japanese beetle traps in vineyards. It's kind of a joke, but we always say if you want to buy a trap, buy it and then just give it to your neighbor and don't actually put it on your property. But the other thing to remember with grapevines is that grapevines can handle a lot of leaf area loss. And in fact, vineyard managers often go through and they cut off a lot of grape leaves. So you could look at Japanese beetles as giving you a bit of free canopy management. But I know we can get situations where they're really devastating. And so in that case, there are some fairly selective insecticides that can go into the leaves and be protected from wash off, and then the beetles would eat those and be controlled. So yeah, I do not advise the traps. They really like laying their eggs in irrigated turf. So if you're in the kind of vineyard where it's really, pristine setting and someone's got irrigated turf nearby, or lawns, those kinds of places can be sources for them. And so sometimes it's better to address that source than try and get all the adults.
All right, now we have a question about what can we do to minimize harm to pollinators when we need to spray fungicides on fruit blooms?
Yeah. Yeah, one thing about grapes compared to a lot of the other fruit crops is that they are not dependent on bees and other insects for pollination. Most of that's done by wind. And so you see very few bees coming to grape flowers. I have seen a few. I've seen a couple of honeybees do it and maybe a couple of wild bees, but it's extremely rare. They don't provide a lot of nectar. There's a little bit of pollen. So I think the risk relative to other fruit crops is really, really different. Of course, you could have blooming flowering weeds in the vineyard, so that might be a strategy, is to mow. One approach would be to mow before you do those bloom time sprays. And then there are some guides. We actually have a guide at MSU that we could again circulate to the registered attendees that's on the relative risk of different fungicides to pollinators. And there's a big table in the back listed by product that gives them a very coarse ranking of risk. So if that's something you're concerned about, we can provide a little bit of information that might help you guide your product selection.
Scott Walker asked a question about, is micronized sulfur effective against mites, and at what rate?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks for the question. I don't have a lot of experience with micronized sulfur, so I'm going to probably have to get back to you on that. And it would depend a little bit on which mites we're talking about. So how about if I'll just reach out to you after the presentation. Sorry, I don't have that at my fingertips.
Virginia Wrinkle wants to know if we're seeing an increase in leafhopper at this time. We haven't been seeing much scouting recently, but I don't know, Rufus, if you've heard other reports of it.
Yeah, similar experience, Jackie, in the vineyards I've been looking at. Haven't seen leafhoppers too bad, and most of I think the last many years, leafhopper has not been an issue for most of our scouted vineyards. We're in commercial vineyards that are being treated for other things, and so that if you're in a different kind of setting, maybe they're a bit more. But we did see some potato leafhopper coming into the state early in the spring, and in some vineyard sites, those are still active and something to keep an eye on, but nothing like the leafhopper levels I saw like 10 years ago, where you'd see, you could tell from driving by at 40 miles an hour that the vineyard had a lot of leaf feeding. So yeah, so far not a big leafhopper year.
William Harrison is asking where the link to the fruit survey is. I don't have that, but maybe Catherine or somebody could circulate that to the attendees. So
yeah, Bill, I saw an article, I think it came out in Fruit Grower News online, highlighting that just recently. So that's the only lead I've got for finding the survey.
Yeah, I'll look that up. This is Catherine. I'll look that up, and I'll make sure that we can either get the link to you or in some other way.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the long, rather than reading it, Jackie, there's this question from Joe about the Frontenac and Marquette with phylloxera. So yes, with phylloxera, it is can you put that question back?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Be able to read through it, sorry. Yeah, so there's a question about rates there. I think there's a 12.5 ounce per season limit, and we have found better phylloxera control following the label directions, where there's like one application right after bloom and then another one 30 days later. So as we get into August, I always advise people to look at the pre-harvest intervals, but I think you still would be okay with that. You could apply it with a backpack sprayer. One of the good things about this product is it does move around, and so you wouldn't need perfect coverage to get it through to all of the canopy and then down into the roots. I do think for next year, if you don't do that treatment this season, it would be really good to be in the vineyard earlier once there's a canopy after bloom, say back in June, to do the first application at that time before the phylloxera get a chance to make the galls and be feeding inside there.
I think you hit all the main points on that. Sorry, I couldn't move it back to the open, but
Okay, good.
Answered question. Yeah. Ben Smith is asking about vineyard floor management strategies or fence row management to be taken after harvest to reduce overwintering GBM.
Yeah, okay. So overwintering GBM, it's true that they do overwinter. Some proportion of them are in the vineyard under the vines, and then they pupate either in the clusters or in the leaves. And I had one student do a leaf tracking study where she painted a bunch of leaves during the late part of the summer with fluorescent dye, and then we looked at where they were next spring. And a huge number of those leaves, great proportion of them, get blown out, and they're getting caught up in, as you say, Ben, the fence row at the edge. So I don't have experimental evidence for this to say this, but I have a general feeling that if you could prevent them from surviving as well as they seem to in the woods, you'd have less pressure the following year. I do know of growers that have taken out fence rows where they had maybe just one little strip of trees or bushes, and that did result in reduced berry moth pressure. Of course, if you've got 40-acre woods, that's not really possible. The understory plants, like especially wild grape, if you have a way to get wild grape removed and trunk treated with a Tordon type of herbicide to stop any regrowth, I've never been able to show that has a significant reduction of subsequent berry moth pressure, but the fact that the grower removing bigger chunks resulted in lower pressure, I think, speaks to that there is something going on there. The fewer places they have to hide or to develop outside of where you're treating, the less likely they are to come back the following year. We've also tried, this sometimes comes up, with the idea of treating the ground floor with insecticides, and we had vineyards where we did and didn't do that, and we saw absolutely no significant difference between those two things. So I think the pupae are just very well hidden under the leaves, and it's very difficult to get any treatment to them. In the old entomological texts, before they had synthetic pesticides, there was a lot of talk about tilling in the late spring once the ground was thawed and before berry moth emerged, to move those pupae that might be on the surface down under the soil surface to reduce their survival. So that's a mechanical approach, and that's the only other idea that I've got. Maybe difficult to implement depending on how your farm borders are set up, but that's something else that could be considered. Yeah, and I see the last two comments there. So we will share the Wisconsin Yellow Jackets work. And Michael, thanks for that comment. And correct, Bill, Movento also for tumid gallmaker. That has been an increasing issue in some of our vineyards earlier in the season, and it has this sort of, it's also called the tomato gallmaker. So you get these red, pink clusters within, either on the leaves or on the grapes. timing on that is really important. So making an application just when you start to see the first galls is the way to go. And maybe make a note in your diary of when you saw it this year so that you can go back and be maybe a little bit earlier next year. So yeah, thanks for all the great questions. That was good. And thanks for logging in today. And I'm hoping that we'll see you in a vineyard soon.